And now we're recording live, so
Okay.
let's see who shows.
Caption. See. Been busy.
There's plenty to do.
I'm sure I must be so much to catch up with for you. Also with the election. Oh my goodness.
Well, I think we got a workable solution for that. Like a lot of things in life, as soon as we decide on one thing, I learn about other options that we might have wanted to consider, but we really do need to test these things. So I'm confident that the test we performed at full board will put us in good stead for March. The next big thing is going back and being both in person and on Zoom at the same time. Hybrid meeting is going to be tricky.
That's, I don't, so I was gonna actually, ask you, is there like a way to advocate for more, like to remain in Zoom or maybe, meet once in a while? I mean, I feel like so many people just can do so much more while we're in Zoom.
So that's an argument for why we should be able to do hybrid meetings, because the public is now used to, and quite frankly is entitled to, in my view, participate from wherever they are. But the open meetings law is a state law that says that it used to say that if you want to cast a vote at a meeting at all and you're a member, you have to be at the meeting, have to be there physically present and among the other people. Phoning it in doesn't count. They modified that last year during the budget consultations at the state level to allow that as long as a quorum of the public body is present in person, other members can show up and participate remotely. That may be further amended this year at the state legislature, but to your question, if you wanted to advocate for a different result, it would be to your state legislators. So it would be to Deborah Glick, to in the assembly, and to Brian Kavanaugh and Brad Hoylman Siegel in the New York State Senate. Those would be the people who would be on the front lines of this.
Well,
Brad in particular was very, very deeply involved in the amendments to the open meetings law last year. So I would assume he and his staff would have continuing interest in that.
That'd be so helpful. I mean, just feel like packing another 2 hours, just like going and being there in the right place, taking notes, exchanging notes. That's been so helpful. But anyways, hi everyone. I see the Valerie's here. Has been very she's advised me for many things. So we can start at 6. See, that's another reason staying home is helpful now. This cold. I think Janine has the same cold now.
Oh, no.
It's 6:30, so we're going to start our meeting. Welcome to Arts Institution. My name is Ivy Arce. I guess we should make introductions. Susan Gammy.
Hi, I'm Susan Gammy. I'm a full board member of Community Board 2.
Robin. Hi, Robin.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I was on the phone with my mom, and moms take a little precedence. So hi, Robin Rothstein, a member of this committee and the full board.
And there's Carter.
Hi guys, Carter Booth. I'm also a member of Community Board 2, but not this committee.
And Rocio. Maybe she can get back a little later. So we can begin the The representative from DIA is gonna be a little later. She's getting off the train, so we can start. We have two agendas. Oh, hi,
Ivy,
Rocio.
I'm here. Hi, I'm sorry,
Hi.
I was muted before. Thank you.
And then there, what is it? Can somebody promote Valerie yet, please?
Just did.
And then there's Valerie. So we have two things on the agenda today, which is one is we're gonna have a teach-in by actually by Mark, which we, I think this group really needs, so we can figure out so we're not caught in November for trying to figure it out for the capital budget. And then we'll have the DIA present. Hi, Stacy. And there's Stacy.
Hi.
Okay, so shall I kick off a little bit here?
Sure.
Great, thanks. So I'm
Sure.
going to share the screen here. Let's see. So we're going to start here at the Department of City Planning. And so what we're talking about are the two related documents, the Statement of District Needs and the Statement of Budget Priorities for Community Board 2 Manhattan. These are charter mandated functions that the community boards are required to complete. The Statement of District Needs is a narrative statement. I'm sure you've all been through some part of it or other at some point along the process. What's relatively new is that the Department of City Planning, which is the agency that collects these statements and so forth, has created and is now refining an online portal where your statements are uploaded through the district office, and they have a very specific organization for how they want to receive that data. Among other things, there are the first page has the top 3 district-wide needs for each community board across the 59 boards across the city of New York. And then there are subcategories of district need for broad categories. Arts and institutions most likely would fall within the Parks, Cultural, and Other Community Facilities Department. And then within that, it would be the needs for cultural services, which are directed to the Department of Cultural Affairs, DCLA, or it could be directed to the needs for library services, and that would be the NYPL for us. The separate but not really separate aspect of that is the Statement of Budget Priorities for our district. And the distinction is that there may be needs that the board decides to highlight that require action that isn't financial, that is loosening a regulation, for example, or changing a way in which we approach a problem. The budget priorities are obviously they are the financial aspect of commenting on the mayor's budget even before it's released. So the timeline, let me see if I can pull that up. The timeline for that is, why isn't it there? So the timeline for that is, so here is your top 3 pressing issues, and then the single most important issue by policy area. That's often very difficult to narrow down. And then you have the third component over here, which are the board budget requests. A brief word about that, which isn't highlighted here, is that in effect, there are 2 city budgets. Forgive me if I'm saying things you already know. There's the capital budget and the expense budget. Capital budget are usually items that cost more than $50,000 and have a useful life of more than 5 years, is it? I think it's 5 years. expenses, things that are not capital. Most of the time, that is what you think it is. So, for example, building a basketball court would be a capital priority. Running a program for youth with students and coaches and so forth, that would be an expense priority. The one that I always think is kind of fun to confound expectations is that police cars are not capital, they're expense. And the reason is that they don't last 5 years. They wear out very quickly. So, but generally speaking, those are the parameters through which we evaluate what it is we're asking for. It's also strategic to keep that in mind, because generally speaking, what we're doing here is trying to advocate for needs in our district, and those needs are generally funded through different streams. And sometimes the streams of funding that are available to us are capital as opposed to expense. And so trying to find a way to make these things capital is part of the strategic way of getting the needs met. A quick side note on this, again, please forgive if it's obvious. We're talking about the city budget. We're not talking about the state budget or the federal budget, even though aspects of the city's funding streams that fund the city budget can come from those other sources. We're talking about the budget that effectively is proposed by the mayor and eventually adopted by the city council. So the timeline, let me scroll down a little bit here. The timeline is that right now, we are talking about, believe it or not, the fiscal year 2025 budget. We're in fiscal year 2023. So the budget that's being negotiated now between the mayor and the city council, with all the hearings that are going on and so forth, is the fiscal 24 budget that will start July 1st of this year and end June 30th of next. So what we're doing now is getting ready for a fall advocacy for what we think OMB and the mayor should put into the fiscal 25 budget. There is a bit of attenuation there because there's always an urge to respond to current needs by making a budget request out of them. And sometimes that could be 2 years after the fact. For example, when COVID hit and schools went remote, there was a gigantic need for devices for students to log in and go to school. Some students obviously had them at their fingertips. Others needed city investment to get that to them. But because of the way the budget cycle works, if we waited for the end of the budget cycle, they would have missed the whole year and a half of school. If we read the headlines and Chalkbeat today, that apparently they did. So anyway, the strategic part of it is that generally, we talked about that. Okay. So the timeline is that during this part of the year, the community boards gather data and input from all the sources that make sense. And then over the summertime, which when we're not meeting, they synthesize that. What happens right in the middle here is that in September, there's something called the budget consultations, which are attended by, generally speaking, the district managers, that's me, of the community boards, borough by borough, and about 24 agencies, not all of them, but many of them, come to the Office of Management and Budget, sit with us for an hour each, and explain, they answer questions that we've prepared in advance, and then they kind of explain what their needs are and how they are approaching their budget. The district managers prepare the questions. Some agencies will prepare answers in advance, and then you can have a real conversation about what does that mean and where should we look next. Sometimes they come with an empty legal pad and we try to get whatever we can out of it. We then report that back to the various committee chairs and so forth. Then in the October-November timeframe, we prepare, or through your input, we prepare a narrative statement of district needs. And as I said, that it's fair game to say that we need regulations to be loosened or an agency to be created or whatever, in addition to the statement of budget priorities, which is here's how we should spend the money. There are a couple of tips that I'll show about how to be effective in making those requests. First thing to know is that generally speaking, the mayor doesn't stay up at night wondering what it is that district managers think should be funded or not funded through the budget. But who does care is those with member items. So specifically here, we're talking mostly about the borough president, who has a charter mandated piece of the budget pie to spend. Most of that is capital, but there is a little bit of expense money there. And then member items for individual council members. And the Speaker of the Council generally determines how the total pot of council member item dollars are available and to whom and for what, keeping in reserve amounts for what I'll call citywide projects. For example, there were renovations to the Museum of Natural History, bigger than any one council member's budget items could have possibly supported. So that was a call out from the whole of the council. Okay. So that's why keeping things in the capital realm is the important thing. Here is, so as I was mentioning, the portal through which we put in our narrative statement and our statement of budgetary needs. And I'm focusing in on needs for cultural services because we're talking about the Arts and Institutions Committee. That's here under needs for cultural services. So it's under the rubric of parks, cultural, and other community facilities. That's a very broad category. I mentioned before that each board is required to identify 3 top priorities or needs for the district. It will not surprise anyone to hear that almost every community board in the city identifies affordable housing and some form of youth or education services as among those top priorities. I'm sorry to say that cultural affairs doesn't usually make the top 3. But here we are, and this is how we would be supporting these things. And so here's support nonprofit cultural institutions. That could either be capital if they need to build a building or expand a facility, or expense if they need to hire people and run programs. You get the gist. I don't have to go through all of this, but you see the idea. And then I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. There's a separate entry for libraries. And again, the big ask from the New York Public Library, generally speaking, is expense. They're trying to hire back the people that they lost. Actually, they lost them in the 2008 recession. They got a few of them back when we recovered in the mid-teens. And then after COVID, they lost them again. So it's kind of a push me, pull you on that. I'm going to switch now to ways in which to strengthen submissions. And there's a couple of ways in which we can do that. Speaking in English apparently is one of them they had to call out. Let's see. Tying back to the budget priorities, the district needs statement is one important aspect of it. So while it is the case that there may be district needs that are not susceptible of solution by funding, the opposite should not be true. Everything that we say we need to fund should correspond to a need identified in our narrative somehow. Second thing is that you need to specify the right agency. So for us, mostly that's going to be DCLA or NYPL. There may be areas in which there are collaborations and coordinations about that sort of thing. Let's see. You need to connect clearly the need with the request. So the need needs to answer the problem that we're trying to solve. And one of the ways in which they recommend and that we do this is through the use of data. Having statistics to support the claim of need is important. I'm going to show off here and say that here's one that I wrote for a different community board a few years ago, and it made the little highlight reel that's on the Department of City website, City Planning website, because it highlighted a particular condition that wasn't well appreciated with respect to how youth services how our youth are being served. And this is an example of ways in which you can use data to amplify and support. Another way that you can amplify and support that is particularly relevant to this committee, I would suspect, is having letters of support from agencies. Now this whole checklist has to do with youth services. That's why they're highlighting Children's Aid Society. But having a letter of support from either the cultural institution that you're trying to support, saying, yeah, we really need to expand our theater, or we really need to create a new opportunity or venue or whatever it might be, or if it's expense, we really need to hire a person to do this because we're missing opportunities to serve our public. Those are ways in which you want to highlight the needs that you're trying to amplify. And then other sources of data. Let me see if I have that handy. Where was that? Okay, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry, give me one more second. So on the Department of City Planning website, you'll see that one of the things that they talk about, that there it is, a whole section on community district needs and how we can find tools to support us. And up here, you'll see there's a tab for data and tools. Come on, don't be shy. Okay. And I'm not going to go through all this for sake of time, but you'll see there's a tab for census, and that will bring you to all kinds of ways in which to analyze census data. And census, by the way, includes the American Community Survey, which is a much more narrowly focused or geographically limited neighborhood by neighborhood way to assess needs and so forth. This is obviously a tool that works for a lot of different things, land use and planning as well, but it does have sources of data and demographic data that can be useful to this process and trying to inform a statement of need based on those kinds of resources and support. I think that's more than enough for these purposes. I hope that that is in some way instructive. And I'll welcome any questions if the chair has time.
Robin? I don't know who was first, actually. I'm sorry, Robin. And
Oh.
then
Yeah, great, Mark, that was great. First question, is this a new approach that the city is taking? Is this new?
I've only been doing this 3 years. You'd think that I would get the hang of it. So the answer is sort of, because because community boards had widely varying compliance with the requirement to do a district needs statement. It's about 8 or 9 years ago that the Department of City Planning started insisting that everybody use this portal. So it's about 8 or 9 years old. On the other hand, it has been radically changed 2 or 3 times in those 8 or 9 years. It is a little less. The best iteration of it was about 3 years ago, just before COVID, because they allowed you to both input limited, the space on the website is limited. So you have to compress what it is that you're saying in your narrative, but then you could attach a document that explained the rest. Now they've done away with the ability to attach that extra document. You can attach the statement of support from your cultural institution. So the answer is sort of. It's both old and new at this point. It is limiting in that they make you be concise, but sometimes that's a virtue too, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say this is all new news to me. I was chair for this committee for 7 years, and I wasn't aware of a whole portal, and I was there was any upload. I'm not sure if our whole board was aware that this was how to do things. I mean, I know we got our stuff in. Bob, Matt, was always asking us for our things to send into him, so he got it in, I guess, the old school analog way, whatever that was. But it's good to know that this exists. And then my second question is, it sounds like, so over the years, basically, I was working with a district need statement that wasn't, the district need statement itself wasn't specific. It was more of like, and and the other committees seem to be the same. Like it was more of a general, like a mission statement and narrative. It provided some context and history. And, obviously we were saying we're always advocating for artists and real estate is expensive and we need to find spaces. There weren't direct asks in the statement. It was sort of like this general narrative. But then what you showed with within the Excel worksheet, when a theater came to us and said we want to build an ADA elevator, then within that that box for the capital ask, we would then specify who this group was, they need an elevator, this is why, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so my question is, the district needs statement I described is no longer, is that obsolete now? The sort of general mission statement as far as this process goes and for budget and budget requests?
So let me answer it this way. First, there is a distinction between the district needs statement, narrative statement, and then the budget priorities that are linked to it. So while both need to be more concise and a little less aspirational than perhaps we used to do in years past, it is much more important that the statement that the statement of budget priorities be highly refined and specific, and not a general statement of we need to revive the arts in New York City in order to recover as a city. You can use that as an opening paragraph in the narrative if you want, but statements like that. So the one thing I didn't show you, and there's a reason for it, but let's not get sidetracked. What I didn't show you is, what do the agencies send back after we do this? And they send back a spreadsheet that almost invariably says, what a great idea, we don't have the money, why don't you ask your council member? They say it a little nicer than that, and sometimes they say it a little snotty, sorry to say. And they usually get snotty when we get general. So the more specific, the more persuasive you want to be, the more specific you need to be. And that's in the narrative statement. In the budget statement, it really is as you know, prosaic as, we need to fix the door on the NYCHA building at the corner of X and Y. We need to build a new curtain for the proscenium of the theater at this location. That will get a very serious answer. It may not get any money, but it'll get a very serious answer. And then going back to our strategic part of this, why are we really doing this, other than we don't want the mayor to make fun of us because we didn't do our charter mandated function? And every mayor I've ever seen has always done that at some point in his career. The reason we do this is that when our elected officials have their member items, we want to give them a checklist for just how to spend their money in our district instead of somebody else's district. So that's why we say, let's fix the door at the stage door at XYZ. Let's come up with the money for the installation of whatever. I hope
Right,
that's,
that all makes sense. Our budget requests have always been, as at least I made every effort to make them as clear and specific as possible. I'm just not clear how the district needs statement fits into this picture. I think if I were to go to the website and look at more information, it would be clearer. Because like I said, it's typically been, that has been, I guess, more historic context, aspirational. Here are the examples of companies and museums you have in our district. It's just sort of like a you know, welcome to CB2 arts institutions to people who've never been here before. And just so they would like, we have all these museums, you have all these artists, you know, we're historically an arts supportive neighborhood. We don't do any asks in the district needs statement. So I guess I'm not, and it's always been sort of broader. And then then I completely on the same page with the direct asks in the budget. So again, I guess I'm still a little unclear about the point of the district needs statement per committee if it's not how it's used. I'm not quite clear.
let me answer it this way, and I see another hand. Let me answer it this way. In the ideal world where these requests are honored and funded, you would really want to spend the next 3 or 4 months going door to door to the cultural institutions that you think might need help. And that might include the Whitney too, because even though they're big, they're, you know, everybody's strapped for money. And say, what do you need? And, you know, and what do you need that government can fund? Because those are often two different things. There is a reality check, and the chair of the board has cautioned me to be careful about this, because elected officials at the end of the day are going to fund what they're going to fund. They may take 1 or 2 items from our list, but spending the incredible number of staff hours it is, and volunteer staff hours now I'm talking about, to come up with this robust list may not be cost effective to you in your volunteer lives, where you are obviously being called upon to do many other things as well. But to the extent that you really have, that you can be very specific on these things, that's where you're going to have the greatest persuasion and the greatest impact. So now is the time to be collecting those letters, collecting that input, and then over the summer we can sort of work together to write up what it is we're going to say about all that. And then after the budget consultations in the fall, we can put numbers around these things and say, here's what we think you ought to fund. That's my best answer to that question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, you know what I might do is I might show you what we have as our district needs statement. You can tell me what's wrong with it and how we have to fix it.
Never say what's wrong with it, but I will say that I don't think we have one for the current fiscal year. Certainly there's none on the DCP website. It might be a casualty of, people retiring and the office, God bless them, keeping things afloat. But whatever, or maybe it's in a different place than I thought to look.
Well, I mean, specifically, what happens is all the committees would then funnel them to the district office and it would go into one, but I'm just talking about, I would show you our specific, what I
Yeah.
have, the arts and institutions one, and you can tell me like, we got to scrap it and start from the beginning.
Well, you're all going to start a little bit because the last 2 years, every district needs statement and every budget priority started with during COVID, and that's not going to be our statement anymore.
Mhm.
All right,
Well,
thanks.
Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That was really clarifying. Obviously, we can each get on the DCP website on our own steam, but the other two components of your presentation, I don't think were from the DCP website, and I'm wondering if you can either put them in the chat or email them to us if you would be kind enough to do that, because they seem pretty helpful and dense.
Sure. I'm glad to share them. I'll do it through an email because I downloaded them, and that's the easiest way to share them right
Perfect.
now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So efficient. Valerie?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. First of all, I just want to commend you for having Mark come in and talk about this. I think this is a great manifestation out of one of our last conversations about the budget. So I'm really happy to see you really take that leadership role. Mark, lots of great information. I have two questions, and one maybe perhaps you already answered, but and kind of just thinking of, it's about to be March. These are due. We vote on them usually on the expense and the capital, usually at our October meeting for CB2. That's how we've done it. And usually in September, it's kind of, we're back from summer and it's kind of the scramble of, oh my gosh, we've got to have, everyone's got to have the budget on their either September meetings or their October meetings if they're before the full board. And so, looking at it and just kind of thinking, we really only have, especially for our, committees like this one or like economic development, where we're not application driven, we're really more proactive. We really have about 5 opportunities left, each month, right, to either host programming or hear from the community or do our own, where it's discussed as business in a committee forum. And so what else, how do we as a board, get ahead of that now? Are there things in terms of best practices? I know, Mark, you and I have had a conversation about this. How should we as a board be reacting to that executive budget, or for instance, for FY24, like we're still finishing off the approval of FY24, which we know starts in July. And we get those responses back from OMB. What are the best practices there to help kind of start getting in gear for FY25? How do we react to FY24 as it's still in limbo? It's kind of big questions. Thank you for letting me ask my questions.
Sure. So let me answer it this way, and and let me know if I'm off track here. The voted upon district needs and budget priorities back in the fall are a useful starting point for a board to advocate for what is under negotiation between the mayor's OMB and the council. So there are hearings that are going on right now, in fact, with the executive budget and the preliminary budget, and then they take all that back and then come up with the executive budget, and then the real fund begins, and they have another round of hearings. So having voted on priorities in the fall, assuming that that happened,
Mhm.
obviously I wasn't here, they become easy ways in which anybody can advocate, either through a letter or through showing up and giving live testimony, which people do. Community boards do that from time to time, depending on the nature and so forth. Ironically, you made the distinction between application-driven committees and committees that kind of generate their own agendas. It often is the case that the budget priorities that are the most complete and most I was about to use the word fulsome, but I'm constantly reminded that it doesn't mean what I think it means. Anyway, the most generously populated come from the committees that are not application driven. In effect, there aren't a lot of asks other than maybe, for LPC or for SLA, other than begging them to hire more staff. And SLA, of course, is state, so it isn't even the city budget, so that things move more smoothly. There isn't a lot of an ask there, and it ain't capital neither, so it's not going to be funded by the council member either. But it is committees like Arts and Institutions and Parks and Waterfront, where there are endless needs, not necessarily application driven. So that's my answer to how do you convert the work that you do in the fall into a response to the negotiations that are going on now and through, I'm going to say June 24th, because it takes them a couple of days to print and sign.
Got it. Thank you. And I have one more question, Ivy, if you don't mind. Mark, this is in terms of, I know you know the portal, and that's usually what the district manager interfaces with that, so that's no surprise here. What are some things in terms of, like, is there a character count or a word count that we should kind of start with in mind to help make that process more streamlined? And what are some other things that we can do to make that a smooth process? Thank you.
So I'll answer that this way. There is a character count both for the top line, top three district-wide needs, and for each individual. And you remember I showed you the Department of Cultural Affairs page of this. As you drill down further and further, the word count or the character count gets smaller and smaller. So being concise, bullet points with complete sentences. I know that's almost like an oxymoron, but bullet points with complete sentences are preferable over an extended narrative, especially on the budget priorities. And if you want to, there's nothing that says that the letter you get from the cultural institution that supports the priority you're trying to advocate for, there's nothing that says that you can't write the first draft of that letter. In effect, helping your cultural institution tell you what you need to advocate for them. So being concise is going to be important. In practical terms, a lot of folks take last year's statement and mark it up. And I'm not going to pretend that isn't an efficient way to do things. First thing is, I think it requires a little extra effort than that this year, because the last couple of years, the budget priorities and the narrative statement had a lot to do with COVID and a lot to do with the unique circumstances there. And we need to move on from that, because we're looking ahead 2 years now, or a year and a half. So if you want a tip on how to fit in the box, start with a new premise or a new topic sentence, and then see what you can do to eliminate what doesn't jive with that. And I think you'll be on the right path.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, like, let me get back. So while the COVID, like, introduction to the ask is no longer valid, we also have a situation that may be a fluctuating issue, but I think, like, institutions are going to be deeply affected what they need in terms of the immigrant migration but then it could be temporary, we don't know, but so I'm looking at, I'm thinking library, right? That is going to be the source where a lot of people are going to need, that's their entry to a lot of things, from jobs, blah, 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 blah. But then it may be like, it doesn't, maybe it will change and whether that ask is even, I'm assuming, let's say you ask for X amount of money, and because right now it's real, in 2 years is not, that can get adjusted, correct?
Yes, it can certainly be adjusted both on the capital and the expense side.
Mhm.
Since you raised libraries, I'll quickly say that libraries hardly ever have books anymore. They are resources. It is the place where seniors and people looking for work routinely find computer resources, because good luck finding a job. I mean, I was a recent job applicant, and if I didn't have access to the internet, I wouldn't be having this nice conversation with you today. It's just how things work in the real world, and you need to provide that. You also need to provide safe havens for all children and teens, and libraries increasingly are a venue for that, not the only one for sure. But they fill all kinds of roles that were peripheral 20 years ago that are now core mission. And some of that takes a different skill set. Some of that just takes more of the same skill set. So, and then looking ahead, that's not going to change in 2 years. The needs that you see burgeoning now are going to be in full flower then.
So, and the part of the question, because it's for me, digesting all this is like super thick, right? As soon as you showed me the portal, I'm like, there was there's another layer. So I was just like for me was suddenly like, how, if this was a dinner, right? If this was a dinner and we had to assign like who's going to wash dishes when, because we got to get along, I'm also backtracking into like, how do we get informed what the community needs? Because we sit here and we have like the slides and we're looking at the immigration issue and the youth issues, but how do we invite and how do we get like a better discussion of what, for example, going back to the dinner, how do I know what my guests want for dinner?
Sure. So just like a good Thanksgiving dinner, you plan in advance and say that, Mark is going to bring something chocolate, whether we ask him to or not. So let Mark bring chocolate, and Ivy will make the turkey and so forth. So the not so flippant answer to your question is you plan that in advance, and you and I can work on that offline. And in a committee like this, where it's a big tent that you're convening here, because there are a lot of different things. People immediately think of different things when you say cultural institutions. Each of your members, I suspect, have preferences. And so one way is to say, well, Mark likes dealing with libraries, so we'll assign libraries to Mark, and he'll contact the libraries. And Ivy is tight with fine painter artists, and somebody else may be a fan of dance and so forth. That's an efficient way to make the work palatable and not overburden any one person. But like I said, that would be a good thing to talk about offline and in between meetings.
Okay. Carter, thank you so much.
Yeah, having been on the board for a while and going through this, the number one thing is that most board members don't know the difference between a capital and all the different terms. So that's number one. And you can't even think about this unless you understand those terms. And then who is it that you're asking for the money from? And many cultural institutions are very narrow in where they can get funding from the city, because there's not necessarily a part of the city that might fund some element of what they do. And that's one of the things that you really need to understand before you can even start thinking about this. And goes to what Mark was saying about using your time efficiently. Without understanding that, you think about all these things, then you realize, wow, this doesn't really fit in. Who would pay for that? Is this better for their funds where they're not discretionary to tackle something? And then the difference with libraries is very different, because I think they're they're not private institutions like many of the other cultural institutions, and they tell us often what their actual needs are. And so it's not hard to put that into our budget priorities, the capital and expenses, and fit it into whatever it is. But that understanding the framework helps use the time most effectively, because as you come along things, you can ask people and start creating a list, for example. And they're also, from what Mark was saying too, just because it doesn't go into our own board's list doesn't mean that we can't use it as advocacy when other people ask us, where can this money be spent? And Senator Hoylman, for example, I think a couple years ago had allocated a certain amount of money for boards to make suggestions for how that might be spent. And we were easily able to plug in requests to that because we had already had the discussion, and because some of those needs were already clearly identified, written up in a particular way, and we could turn it around in the time frame that he had asked for, which was not very long. And that's one of the hardest parts. And that's why it's so great everybody's talking about this now, because coming up even with just a few realistic asks is not as easy as it might seem. And I just echoing what Mark said about spinning wheels too much to finding those, because it'll make you crazy, and also how underfunded many organizations are. And so it's interesting as you guys go along to just think about capital expense. What are needs? Asking people where, the organizations, where do you guys need help? That's why it's so great doing updates from the institutions, because that's a great opportunity to just ask them. And sometimes it's small projects that everybody can wrap their head around that may end up getting funded from an alternate source, not necessarily through our process.
Well, can you give me an example of that? Because I mean, that was this is the whole learning thing for
Yeah,
me.
it's been a while, and I'm forgetting the things that were fully funded. But for example, schools, when they have a very identifiable project, for example, dividers to segregate space, to play areas, eating areas, etc. That's can be very expensive putting those in, but it's a very specific need, and suddenly they can use the space much better. That was, I think, one of our asks in the past years, or sometimes the schools have a lot of examples of that, of very specific projects. And I think some of the others are equipment to help make a space more multi-use space. Those are some of the things that I'm remembering. From the institution side, I think of the libraries. There are a couple of projects, but I can't remember the specific projects. I think the Jefferson Market, part of what they did now, we had asked for part of that as one of the requests a number of years back. But it's really understanding budget, expense, and who's the money come from, so you know who to ask for it from. And I think that, for example, we ran into a problem with ADA access with one of the local churches. Even though they opened their space up for others to use, it was still a church and therefore not eligible, if I remember correctly, for some of the funds. So there's some things that really have to look at and understand who it is that it's coming from, where does it fall, so that it can be put together and then presented. And what happens that most people don't think about this early enough, and so it's a scramble and it never actually ends up being done, and things aren't properly put forward.
Right.
And I think that's what
And
Robin,
that's why I was like
just alluding
looking for, I've been talking to Robin and Valerie and Janine, and I still couldn't like understand it at all. And like Mark has said to me, it's not a one-time discussion. And I think we also, as we process through the month, I think we need like a system that would either work with us, right? So that I'm not imagining what an ask and what really, who's going to give it to us, and be realistic. But until we're, doing that process, I basically don't know what I'm wrapping myself around.
So
So-
if I could jump in
I
on
think-
that part,
yeah, I was
Ivy,
gonna
wanna
say,
two
Valerie,
things.
I have to jump off a second. I was gonna say Valerie has the list that she could put up that shows you what we're actually discussing. I think, do you have that, Valerie, that you could just show people what it looks like to help?
We could do that in another meeting because she did show me last year when I was in the deadline. And I was like, I have to pay the bill, but I had no idea where the bill was. And she showed me all this, like, you know, and I was like, wow. And that was part of the reason coming into this year is like, please, you know, walk us through. Actually, let me let Stacy, and I'd love to hear from Rocio and Chris as well.
Well, I was just going to say that apropos of what we were talking about, having cultural organizations come in and present to us what they're doing and what they need. We do have Rachel Pivnik, who's the deputy director of DIA, waiting in. She's on the waiting in the waiting room. If we want to bring her in, I don't know how we wanted to deal with the timing for this.
Well, you know, maybe what we should do, this was a good like first meeting because that was a lot of like thick a conversation, and we should get to our guest, and then we do another date for like you know, like start filling the form and filling where we're missing knowledge. And what do you guys think? Good. All right, so Mark, can you
I just asked Rachel to promote. I think she has
Yeah.
to click on something to accept.
thank you.
Yep, here we go.
There she is.
And of course, you know, I'm here 24/7. So the one thing I do want to share with you, Ivy, in response to what you said is it's not a one-time conversation, and it's also not a one-person conversation. So you've got troops, and we'll all do this together.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Hi, Rachel.
Mute myself. Hello, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
So much for inviting Dia to present. As you all know, we've been a staunch Soho arts presenter for quite some time. Broken Kilometer opened in 1977 and the Earth Room in 1979. So we've been around for quite some time, and there were many other sites that Dia had supported for artists in the neighborhood before then, and still the Dream House is around and affiliated with us. So we're very much part of the neighborhood and plan to stay there, I think, forever. That's part of our ethos and having long-term exhibits. And when we mean long-term, we really mean long-term. Both the Earth Room and the Broken Kilometer were galleries before that. Heiner Friedrich is one of the founders of Dia's Galleries, and they were meant to be, well, the Earth Room anyway was meant to be there for about a year. There are two other Earth Rooms that happened in Germany. They're long gone, about the same time. And we have stuck around, and the work has taken on different meaning as the neighborhoods change and the value of real estate has changed. You know, having a loft on Worcester Street that's full of 280,000 pounds of soil in 1977 means something very different than in 2023 with the price of real estate and what the neighborhood has become, et cetera. So we had taken in the last 6 months to conserve these exhibits for the next generation. This is truly I wouldn't say once in a generation. I think that's only 20 years. So this is 40 years on to really make some technology changes in Broken Kilometer, but really prepare these exhibits to be there for the long haul. For both of them, they were closed in the summer. Initially, they were closed in the summer because there was nobody in Soho in the summer. So it didn't matter. I mean, everyone went out east or nobody was there. And then it became more of an issue it was just too hot. We didn't have air conditioning in the spaces. So both of those spaces are now equipped with HVAC so we can be open year round. And I'm really enjoying how the visitors will enjoy the work, welcoming them this summer as our first summer that we're open. So we're really looking forward to that. For Broken Kilometer, the rods get polished. Part of the artwork is looking at the change in the patina of the rods over time, and they're very, very buttery, shiny when they first get polished, and then they get, you know, a little greener and darker and more varied as time goes by. We generally polish every 2 years, every 2 to 3 years. And we took the opportunity when the site was closed in order to polish again. And then we'll be closed for maybe 4 to 6 weeks every few years, probably in January, in order to repolish. We also upgraded the lighting system, which was initially, I think, Walter de Maria, the artist, had gone down to Canal Street and got like the biggest stadium lights that he could possibly find and threw them up there, wanting to imitate natural light. The LED technology, you know, 40 years on, 45 years on, is very different and much more accurate to replicate the temperature and color of natural light. So we have new LED lights in there, which also have given a little bit of a change. In fact, it looks a bit more like the original photograph. So it must have been what these lights were like when they started out, when the stadium lights started, when they started out. So the Broken Kilometer is really, I think, stunning in its new incarnation. There was very little other work that we did there. And I'm sure you'll enjoy when you go over to see. The Earth Room has a almost mythic status. It gets somehow twice as many visitors as Broken Kilometer. It's in various European tour books as the place to go. Our caretaker, Bill Dilworth, has become a mythic figure in Soho for his guru, cool, Buddha-like way of working with our visitors. And people really enjoy. There are a lot of people who just come in once a week and talk to him and really enjoy that experience. That was, whereas the Broken Kilometer started out as a gallery, this was an apartment. It's in an apartment building. So there was a lot more renovation that needed to be done there. Believe it or not, we only had sheets of plastic underneath the swale for these 40 years. That was the technology in the late 70s. The floor held up all right, considering the water had gotten in, because the soil gets watered every week and reworked, and it got under. So we fixed the floors, and we've created a proper bathtub that actually goes all the way up the walls, so we can get water wherever we want and water it, and nothing will go through. So we've created a proper bathtub. This will stay. It's like, again, we want this here for a long, long time. We have the climate control, there are new windows. So it's really a very different, and the earth is alive. So it's a very different experience where I think the soil will be much more stable in this climate control, with a much more of a seal all around it. And then we did some work to the exhibit space itself. We added a reading room in the back, which has been lovely for our learning engagement program. We've had a couple of meetings of our DIA teen program there. We've had group tours there. We expect to have many more meeting space and have various groups just enjoy the space. So that's kind of where we stand. I don't know if you must be familiar with the Soho Arts Network, which we're part of, which is a group of the many cultural institutions, mostly art institutions that are in Soho, who work together on promotion for the community walk, an arts walk in the fall, and then work on other sort of promotion for the group. I don't have very much that I would ask of you. We always need a little bit of extra funding, as everybody does, for just general upkeep and maintenance, especially when we get to the polishing stage, which is a pretty intensive 6 weeks for us. But other than that, we're just want to be, pardon the pun, a beacon in the neighborhood of Soho. I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss anything further.
Anyone? Well, I have a question. How, now that it's open again, and one of the things I wanted to know, like this information that you share, like when you said we're here to stay, you are staying, and there was a lot of will there be a time, like a description of a timeline, like of what you have talked about, of the changes that has happened? For example, the lighting, going with the technology, because now the piece also addresses climate change. Suddenly you're controlling the climate. Whether the community will know about that time, that documentation of changes.
We try to put, it's not a secret. What I told you is not a secret, or I wouldn't tell you, right? So this information appears on our website.
Okay.
And it has appeared in whatever public documents we have. We try to keep as little information. We want people to walk into the exhibit and just experience it as it is, without having too many preconceived notions or bring other information from the outside. And there's someone there, whether it's a caretaker or a gallery attendant, who knows quite a bit if the visitor has more questions. But in terms of, so that's for the visitor's experience when they're there. But I'm not sure what publicity we were going to do, or what other what media that would highlight the changes, because we want to, apart from having air conditioning and being there all year round and trying to maintain a more steady climate, which is actually much better for the soil, because the soil will degrade at a much slower rate if the conditions are more stable. Yeah, I don't know about actually informing the community about those changes. That's not.
Well, they'll find them.
They'll find them. Yeah, they'll find them. I
Robin?
think people noticed, especially when they walk into the earth room, there's much more. It's much more fragrant.
It is. Robin?
Are there any plans in the works for collaborations with other fine arts institutions in the Soho area, or are you sort of in your own sort of bubble? And you're aware, of course, of the other institutions, but is there ever any crossover or, support or collaboration on projects?
In Soho, I don't know. Our next exhibit in Chelsea is with the de Menil collection in Texas. I don't know of any plan. We also work with Chinati, which is sort of affiliated, with the Judd Foundation. But in terms of having the Soho sites, I'm not aware of any.
Is there ever was any thought ever put into it? Or I'm always sort of thinking about how groups can kind of get to know each other and find ways to work together. I mean, maybe that's not how you guys work, but
Yeah.
if there were.
Well, we're quite active members of the Soho Arts Network in promoting all of the institutions in Soho. So that's where we work with everybody.
I had another question about, are there like timelines and schedule where like the local schools go in, or they reach out to you, or it depends on the school?
Yeah, we have a very extensive school program in Beacon, where we touch every second grader who's gone through, and that's been active for close to the 20 years that Dia Beacon has been there. So very active relationship with the Dia Beacon school system. In New York, we have much less of an outreach program, and that's run through Chelsea. So we have a teens program where there are a dozen, say, teens who work with us every week and really have an intense, mind expanding, creative burst over the course of a year. And then we also have a summer program where they're involved. So it's a very, it really makes a huge difference in those young people's minds. And in fact, we have had several Dia teens who've come on as gallery attendants and then worked their way up through the institution. And we also have an arrangement now with the Chelsea Recreation Center. I might be getting the exact name of it wrong, to have offsite programming there. That's also for young people to be immersed into a creative workshop.
But nothing with the lower schools, like the younger kids, right?
We haven't done
It's
that.
terrifying.
We haven't done that. We haven't done that in New York. Of course, if anyone contacts us, it's usually with college visits, where they want to visit the Earth Room and Kilometer. We'll always welcome student groups.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Let me go back to the chat. I saw some stuff in the chat. Soho Art. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Let me go back. Thank you so much, Rachel. I mean, it is obviously, it's such a beloved piece. I mean, when I first came to New York and I wasn't in art, I remember going into that room. I didn't know about anything about the artist, but it had that, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's had that effect on people. In fact, our senior facilities manager in Beacon wanted to work for Dia. The minute he walked into the Earth Room from a school trip from Ohio.
Great. That's great.
It really has a deep impact on people.
It does.
We're so pleased that that's continued.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Looking forward to welcoming you.
Thank you. It's 7:38. We could, do a little house meeting about, what our next steps, what we would like to do. I don't, we should discuss whether we should have a meeting in March or not, depending who we want to invite. Down the line, we will have another meeting with Mark about what we talked about tonight. Rocio, are you there? I wanted to hear from Rocio and Chris.
I'm here. I just want to say I thank you so much for putting this together. I really want to thank Rachel and Mark for their presentations. They were most useful. And I look forward to hearing again from both of them, because we need to be up to date on so that we can put our requests in a better place. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Stacy, so much for inviting them over. And I mean, you obviously know a lot.
No, my pleasure. And I think it's good to have people to come in. I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear what what people have to say. So I'm happy to get some other people to come in if we think it would be worthwhile.
All of them are worthwhile at this point. And I'm thinking also, like, with even the new neighbors that we're going to have, that we're having right now, by even documenting that people are visiting here, if they ever touch upon the community board to be a source.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if we're going to meet on next month.
But for example, I'm just looking at the list. I put it in the chat for the Soho Arts Network that she referenced.
Yeah.
I mean, I happen to, I know that, for example, the Milton Resnick and Pat Pasloff Foundation, that's relatively new. I don't know what they're doing. I mean, it might be interesting to have them come in and present. Just because I knew that I knew that it was being formed, but I don't know what they're doing or how they're gonna present themselves to the world. We could ask them.
Love it.
Okay, so we'll decide if we want to meet in March, and then we can go from there.
I don't know if Chris, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm at work, so I missed all of Mark's presentation, but I got an email about it. But yes, I'm here.
So yeah, I don't, so, in March, I think we may not need to meet. We could keep on deciding who we can invite and make that invitation in the following month. Of course, I had the intention of inviting Mocha, so we're gonna work on that invitation. It's a little more complicated, so I don't think we can make it happen for next month. So
Whatever, yeah,
it's
fine.
maybe we'll skip a month.
Sure.
And then, it'd be, and of course, it'll be great to chip away in this capital budget complicated thing. So yeah, thank you so much. And we'll meet in April then. Thank you. Thank you,
That's
Stacy, so
good.
much
Thank
again.
you, Ivy.
Thanks, Ivy.
Thanks, Ivy. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Valerie,
Bye,
Mark.
and I.
Bye.
Boy, Mark, that was a lot. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.